Hello all, this is Kim from the iMoot team, and I would, on behalf of the iMoot team, like to thank you all for joining us, and also thank Julian for doing this presentation about adult learners and their challenges with technology. So I know most of us face that in the academic world, so very excited to hear his talk. So take it away, Julian.
Hi, thanks, Kim. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Welcome along. First of all, I'd like to apologise for the croaky voice. I'm running a bit of a head cold at the moment, so if I burst into fits of coughing, I promise I'll try and mute it so as not to deafen you all. All right. So what I wanted to talk about was my experiences and what I've come up with some points in regards to adult learners and the challenges that they have with technology these days. We can't put every adult into the same bucket when it comes to learning. They all learn in very different ways, and depending on their age, they're going to face some real challenges with technology. So, okay, there we go. Click the next one. I wanted to start with a little bit of statistics, in particular to what adult learners are. So these are statistics from Australia, and I'm sure they're going to be pretty relevant where you guys are as well. So 60% of learners in 2014 were over the age of 25. That's a pretty significant amount of learners, particularly when you think about school-based learning compared to what adult learners are doing as well. And 21 million mobile handset subscribers in Australia, when we've only got a population of around about 27 million or thereabouts. That's a lot of people with a lot of technology in their hands that potentially don't know how to use it when it comes to learning. Because classroom delivery is very, very different to an online delivery model. And this is where it's more geared towards is how adult learners grapple with some of the technology when it comes to coming back to learning after being away from learning for a while. So some of the, I don't know the ages of you guys out there, but some of the things that have changed over the years, just to highlight some points. If I was to take someone now who was 35 years old, just as a round number, and let's say that they left school at 17. So they left school in the year 2000. What did we have back in 2000 when they were at school? Well, we had Nokia 7110s. If anyone remembers those, they were the green slide-out phones. They were just starting to get web browsing if you were tech savvy and you kind of knew what you were doing. There was a little scroll wheel on the phone. We had Internet Explorer 5 and Netscape Navigator. Windows Millennium or ME, which was an absolutely fantastic product when it came out, tongue in cheek, and Windows CE. So this is when the tablet started, or the little, I can't even remember what they were called now, little things you would hold in your hand and you'd have a little stylus that you'd have to control. Mac OS 9 was not as big as what the OS X is now, and text messaging has just started to come into effect. So these are PDAs, thank you very much. That's it. So these types of technologies were around in 2000, and it might not seem as significant, but when you think about what people are doing now and they're learning now, we've got the YouTubes, we've got access to all these wonderful resources, we've got Wikipedia, we've got access to just about anything from our phones, 24/7. It's not, Netscape doesn't exist anymore, it's morphed into Firefox. We've got Chrome, of course, we've got Moodle and other LMSs, and there's so much more technology out there that was never around in the year 2000 when these particular people were at school. And if they've not learnt since then, the last thing that they know was how they were learning back then. So to jump back into a course now, 17 years later, there's been a massive, massive jump in technology and the way that people now learn. So you've got to take that into consideration. It doesn't seem like much. And when I sat down and started looking at these things and thinking, wow, 2000, that's when we had the Olympics in Sydney. That wasn't that long ago. Yeah, you've got 3D virtual reality and augmented reality as well. There's so much technology out there, and you can't just throw this at adult learners. They're really, really, really going to struggle with this new technology. So what do we know about the way adults learn? A lot of you guys should know a lot of this, that adult learners are very less open-minded. They're very self-directed and they're very goal-directed. So when they do want to learn, it's something that they want to do. It's not being forced to go to school. It's not being forced to go to college or university. This is something that they actually want to do. There's a goal at the end for it, whether it be for a career change or even for their self-esteem, to boost their self-esteem. There's something there that is meaningful to them as a learner. They're much slower learners, yet they've got much more integrated knowledge. They look at the world in a very, very different way. Yeah, it could also be mandated training as part of their job as well, Trish. So that could challenge them as well because of the way that the training's being delivered, particularly if they're starting a new job and have been out of, maybe coming back to the workforce. They're going to struggle with some of the technology. They're incredibly motivated to do the learning unless it's forced upon them through work. But one that I like to call, which is multi-level responsibility that kids at school don't have, but adults do, and it's called life. Life gets in the way of their learning. You might have a family now. You could possibly be working and studying at the same time. So all these different responsibilities get in the way of adult learners as opposed to children at school. So what are the challenges that we face? So I've come up with 5 concepts of what I believe are the challenges that adult learners face. We're trying to group them all together. And the first one that I believe is what I like to call bias. Now, I'm pretty sure you've all heard that Apple sucks, Android sucks, or whatever. It's people will have their own bias towards their type of technology that they use. There's always the Apple versus Android war, or Melanie, I'm with you there. So all of these people are actually going to be biased towards a particular technology. So when it comes to us as educators actually delivering that and delivering content, some things won't work on certain browsers, particularly for delivering in web. And in this case, I'm going to go to IE. I will say that IE is the most used browser in the world for downloading other browsers. I'm a Mac user, so I'm very much biased towards Apple, but as an educator, I have to make sure that things do work on all different devices, and it's very platform agnostic. But yeah, there definitely is a bias towards different technologies, and that's never going to go away as far as I can tell. Literacy is a big one. If anyone knows what that little computer system is behind it, then you'll understand where we're coming from. Very thought-provoking, Melanie. Thank you. It is an Atari console, and that is showing your age now. I'm starting to gauge how old you guys are based on the Atari console. So I wanted to share a couple of experiences that I had when I was delivering a course to some older learners. I'm probably going to say they were in their 40s, and I was delivering this on iPad 101, basically how to drive an iPad. And one of the very, very first things that someone said to me was, "Where do you put the CD?" Now, we might find that quite funny, but in reality, these people had never really seen an iPad, and all they knew was the big tower computers that you put a CD in. And they were quite genuine. They said, "Where do you put the CD?" And that was a real eye opener for me as well. Why is that silly? It's because I'm not trying to be derogatory or anything, but it's because it's the catch up with technology and the digital literacy of what adult learners might know is we can't make assumptions, is what I'm going for. Is we can't initially say that just because we know that you can't put a CD in an iPad doesn't necessarily mean that someone else doesn't know that you can't put a CD in an iPad. If they've never used one before, then how are they actually going to know? So it does come down to that digital literacy. Another one that happened was, if I was to say to you, and we were talking about Microsoft Office 365, and I would say, oh, just go and Google Office 365. Most of us will know that you just bring up a web browser, you open Google, and you'll search for Office 365. They later came back to me and said, Google doesn't make Office 365. I can't find it. So that too came down to the way you express something. Is we already know, talking about, we know technology, we live and breathe technology, but our students may not necessarily do that, particularly adult learners. They may not necessarily understand what we're talking about. The other thing is I look at I'm going to use my mum for a couple of examples in this. My mum's in her mid-70s. She got an iPhone not too long ago. She tries to be as technical savvy as she can. Thankfully, she's got a couple of children that can offer her, let's call it computer support or Mac support. But when she first got her iPhone, I think she nearly pushed her finger straight through the phone, not understanding that they are just a brief little touch. The same with Android, they're just a little touch. She thought that she really had to push it like a keyboard. And this is just a learning curve with the digital literacy as they start to get up to speed. It don't allow 365. Interesting. So yeah, the digital literacy side of things is we can't assume that everybody knows what's actually going on. And it was a real eye-opener for me to see some of those things. Experience and exposure. You've got to think, just because someone's been around for the rapid change of technology doesn't necessarily mean that they've been exposed to it. And what was very interesting is I post these little cards on my website with little snippets of with adult learning concepts and challenges, and I post them up on Facebook. And in this particular instance, I said that just because someone's been around for the rapid change in technology doesn't mean that they've experienced or exposed it. And an ex-Navy friend of mine, I was in the Navy for a long time and I did technology in the Navy, and he posted that he saw this back in 1999 when we were transitioning from one class of ship to another class of ship, and the technology was so different. Although we'd been around for it, no one was up to speed with it and no one could understand it. So the fact that we had actually been around for the growth of this technology doesn't actually mean that we understand it. So it's like my mum, like getting back to my mum, the experience and the exposure, she's not had much exposure to technology. And when she discovered that the only way she was going to be in contact with her grandchildren was to get on Skype. She thought Skype was great. We'll get onto Skype. This will do it. Well, Skype faded pretty quickly for a teenager because you actually have to be there at the time and talk. So Facebook came along, and now mum talks to all her grandchildren through Facebook, and she communicates. She's currently overseas at the moment, and she's posting pictures left, right, and centre of her travels and her jaunts as we go around all over the place. And although she's getting better at it, if I was to send her an email and say, "Oh, just open the PDF," she still might look at me with a very, very blank look, which kind of morphs digital literacy and digital experience and exposure all together as well. Excuse me. This is probably one of my biggest ones that I believe is one of the biggest challenges that we face, and that's what I call digital fear. With adult learners, there is a genuine fear of technology because they don't understand it, because they don't have that digital literacy and digital knowledge to understand what technology can do. They only see what's on the news in respect to scams and I've got it written down here. If they like a page on Facebook, are they going to lose all their savings to a Nigerian farmer that has a donkey that needs an important operation on its eyes? They're very susceptible to that kind of media. If you were to ask a a student to upload a document into the Moodle, so they actually know what's happening to that document. They hear the word cloud, and they really are fearful of the cloud. They don't know what's going to happen. Were my photos going to go somewhere? So because they don't understand it, and the media fear of it, and they talk about all these viruses that are going around, and ransomware is the latest one that I see on the news. Clouds contain tornadoes only if you're on Microsoft. And there is a real genuine fear as well. And I reckon if you went to your parents' mobile phone, you'd be able to guess their password to get in. Try their year of birth first, because they're not quite up to speed with the technology as well. That too, Trish, I would say, is a fear of the amount of time taken to learn a new skill. That comes into it as well, but I still do think that it's coupled with is the risk. There is that genuine risk of what's going to happen to their personal data. So there is a genuine fear of that, and whether that's in education or life, there is a real there. It's the lack of understanding of what things can happen, and I'll talk about later on how us as educators can actually get around that and convince them that it does work, and explaining to them how it all does work. There are things they aren't afraid of that they should be. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's very, very true. There's also the social and culture aspect of it, which can sometimes be called. One of my ex-colleagues said this when I was doing this about a year or so ago, was they called this the digital divide. Now, in society and low socioeconomic areas, that there is definitely a digital divide, and this can really affect adult learners, particularly learners. Let's say that there's a mum out there that's been raising a family for 20 years and decides that she wants to go and do a diploma or a business diploma, and she's from a low socioeconomic environment. She too may not be exposed to all that technology or had the funds to be able to get the latest and greatest, only ever had a computer for her children to be able to do, or had to go to the library. And these type of things are actually going to create a real challenge for adult learners. So it's something that we need to be mindful of as well. So definitely someone's environment or financial situation can have and determine their technology level of what they actually know and understand. So how can we bridge this gap? We're all educators. How can some of the things that we can use to bridge this gap is know your stuff. So before we get into it, and this might sound a bit broad when I say know your stuff, but you can't help someone if you don't know someone. And I'm not talking about the subject that you're teaching. I'm talking about the technology in particular. So you need to have a very, very good grasp on technology. So I'm just going to read what Dirk's written here. Absolutely, Dirk. I totally agree with what you're saying there. And then they end up writing all their passwords down in a book, which is what my mother does. If she loses that book, I don't know what we're going to do. But yeah, know your stuff is get a really, really, really good grasp on technology. Don't be afraid to go and try something. What's the worst that can happen? Just put a little caveat on that, is make sure you back up all your data. But obviously get onto social media, RSS feeds, blogs, follow up with technology. It's not that daunting. And we go to conferences like this and we do see cool technology that's happening. One of the cool things that I really like, I don't know if anyone's seen it, which is H5P. I'm quite involved with H5P, and I use that quite a lot on my own website and within my own Moodle instances that I run. It's very, very cool technology. And I got that just by getting in there and playing and trying to understand how it works. And then if you start using that technology, you'll be able to better talk your students through it and get over that barrier of fear. identify what your students know. Now, this is something that's going to happen quite early on. Particularly in one of my previous roles, I was a distance tutor, so I actually had 80 students from around Australia that would all communicate on different days, and they all had varying levels of skills. So I needed to identify how their best way of communicating is, and this might start off with asking them questions like, "Can I send you an email with the link? Have you tried searching Google?" And based on some of these answers, you'll be able to start to gauge what their level of technology is like. You can't always assume that a student knows everything that's going on. So once you can gauge their response, you'll get a better insight into their knowledge, and that will give you a brilliant starting point and be able to build on that. And you're going to have students coming in. You get students coming in with varying levels of skills sets coming in. Here's your Microsofting. Let's bring it down a notch. So, excuse me. Drop the jargon. Being ex-Navy and being a web developer and being in technology, I can throw more acronyms at you than you could ever imagine. So you need to bring it down. You need to bring it down to the level of the particular students. Once you've identified their digital literacy, you'll know the level of the conversation that you need to have with them. For me, one of the things that I found when I started my teaching career about 10 years ago, and I've been in vocational education for about 10 years. That's right, too many TLAs. I've lost my train of thought. We were just talking about TLAs. Is when I first started getting into teaching, which was initially face-to-face teaching. I found that I started talking very quickly, very technology related, because I was delivering web development. And I brought it down and I started using what I call the bucket analogy, which is everything can be discussed about when you refer to buckets, or even those dolls, those Chinese dolls where you go in and out and grow, Russian dolls that you grow. And I'm talking about simple folder structures. At one point I was delivering a class to adults with disability, which was very rewarding, but trying to explain to them how a folder structure worked was actually quite challenging. So I used a bucket analogy of, if you put a bucket is your main computer, and then you put a bucket in there, which is another folder, and you can put another bucket in there, or you can take a bucket out and put it into another bucket. And that kind of analogy really worked. And I found that I can use that in many different forms when it came to talking about technology and programming and variables and that kind of stuff. It actually worked really well. Providing your resources for students. Now, we all provide resources for students, but you need to understand that some people will actually want it on paper. The last position I was in, it was mandatory that students were given, well, not mandatory, but it was a requirement that the company provided everyone with the student learning materials in paper as well as electronic. And this is because there are still a hell of a lot of people out there that like paper. Me personally, no, I prefer digital. So you need to, some of your students won't want the paper. Some of them will want, yes, we mean trees. People still want paper, which is quite interesting. But you need to find out what this comes back to identifying what your students' skills are and what your students' strengths are, and you can provide those types of resources to your students. If you were to send them to a YouTube link and they're not quite up there with digital literacy, particularly if you I'll send you a link in an email and they give you some sort of blank return, then you know that sending them a YouTube clip is not going to be as beneficial as possibly sending them a printed resource or something like that. So you need to be able to provide those different resources at different levels. And this is a pretty obvious one, is don't give up on your students. the students will give up before you do. So it's our job as educators and building of these resources to not give up. And you will get that light bulb moment. And I've had that light bulb moment with students many times, and it's incredibly rewarding when they just get something. As minor or as big as it is, it's incredibly rewarding with that light bulb moment. So never give up. Never give up on your students. Now, I wanted to share with you a real world personal example of something that happened a couple of years ago. And that was that my partner at the time was in children's services. So she was a childcare minder, well, not a minder, like a group leader in childcare. And in order for her to progress her career, she needed to get into the business side of things. So she decided that she would go and do a diploma in business, which is a logical path to go down. So she applied for a course at the training organisation that I was working for, and she got accepted, and she was doing it all via distance learning, and that was predominantly what the training organisation I work for did. And now I made it quite clear from the onset with her that I would not get involved because of it could potentially be a conflict of interest. But what I was doing is I was observing what she was doing, but I didn't tell her that because I wanted her to just do what she would normally do. I didn't want to persuade her in any way. I actually wanted to watch what happens when someone starts a course. So after a couple of days, she got a shiny backpack and she got a massive book all wrapped in plastic, and she got all the forms that she had to fill out and all the resources and everything. So she filled out all the forms and she mailed them back because there was a prepaid envelope there to mail it all back. Backpack was handed off to the children so the kids had a new backpack. They were happy. The book still sat on the corner of the office desk, still wrapped in plastic. She got her login details into the student portal. She went in, she had a bit of a look around, noticed there was a forum, didn't do much about that. And then from there, she saw that there's a first unit there. So she jumped into the unit, and I'm just sitting back watching as all she did was went straight to the assessment. She just downloaded the assessment and started working on the assessment. And that gobsmacked me because I worked for the e-learning team and a lot of the resource specialists, and we'd done a hell of a lot of work in those resources. Why are you just going straight to the assessment? And to me, it's because there's no discipline there. When you're in a classroom, it's very structured, but when you're online, you can jump straight to the assessment, and depending on the way it's designed, of course. If you're using conditional activities or something like that, you can hide the assessments. But there is, it was a real eye-opener for me to say that, wow, people are just doing this. They're just going straight to the assessment, and then they'll bring up the question, and then they'll Google the question. I don't believe that she even opened her textbook at all. I don't believe she clicked on any of the links. I think she just went straight to the assessment. She got through 2 units, and we later discovered that this type of online learning was not for her. She's very, very much suited to a classroom environment, which is fair enough. But it was still a real eye-opener for me to actually see this. And this, from when she started doing this, I started to get involved quite heavily in the way that you can actually know what your students are learning. And you can't, what's the word I'm looking for? You can't gauge their learning knowledge by assessments. You need to actually know what they're learning. And this is where, I don't know if anyone's heard of XAPI or the Experience API, but it's coming around. It's the next level up from SCORM. And it really is much more powerful, and it allows you to actually track what your students are learning. You can track what they're viewing, what they're engaging in, and it's a very, very powerful tool to actually see what your students are doing. Yes, you can gauge, you can have email conversations and the like, but to actually see how they're engaging in your online environment, the XAPI is an incredibly powerful tool. So if you haven't looked at it, I don't know if there was any talks on the Experience X API at iMoot, but it's definitely something that if you don't know anything about it, go and check it out. And if you've got any sway with your IT department, see if you can get something installed, and you can get what's called a learning record store, which communicates back from multiple instances of any type of LMS and be able to track a student's learning path through. And it's also good for understanding where there might be certain pitfalls, or there might be certain stumbling blocks in your learning course. And this is a great way of identifying that, because when they're just gauging that through assessments, you can't tell if there's any stumbling blocks in your course. So to me, that was a very, very interesting eye-opener, and it really changed the way that I thought about how to deliver things online. And that's where, as Melanie said, conditional activities come in. I think conditional activities are pretty crucial, because it's not like you're forcing the person to learn, but you are guiding them through what they need to learn. XAPI, Michelle, is what's called an Experience API. And it's the new protocol, we'll call it a protocol, of capturing learning data. So whereas the SCORM, if you've created a SCORM object, which has been around for quite a number of years, that will tell you that they've completed something or they've answered something, whereas the XAPI uses verbs. So it says that the student engaged, they answered, they questioned, they viewed, they downloaded. There's different ways. Tin Can's exactly it. Tin Can's the same thing. Tin Can is the colloquial project name, I guess, for XAPI. XAPI is the technical name. Sorry, I have a technical background. So thanks, Gareth. Gareth put a link on there in the chat. But Tin Can is the same thing, and it's just growing, and it's something that we've been missing for quite a number of years, and it's very, very beneficial and very, very powerful. So definitely recommend getting into it and having a look if you're not already using it. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. In summary, there are a hell of a lot of challenges out there. No worries, Jessica, take care. So it's something that I'm quite passionate about, adult learning and the different ways in which adults learn, and it's evolving, it's continuously evolving, and particularly with technology and having to understand how learning and technology with adult learners can come together to benefit everyone. There's not one size fits all, and it's just something you've got to be incredibly mindful of. There's plenty of resources out there. I've got my own blog at juliandavis.com, and I've got some articles on there, and I've also collated the articles into a book, Discovering Adult Learning with Technology, which is just a little ebook which covers a little bit more in detail about what I spoke about today. It's a free ebook. You can go and download it. Just Google it, and you'll find it if you know how to Google. So, so that's it. If you've got any questions, happy to take some questions.
Thank you for that, Julian. I noticed some of what you were talking about there in my own world. So that's just a sign of my age, I guess. But yeah, very informative talk. Yes.
Thanks, Gareth.
Hopefully you are feeling better soon.
Yes. Couldn't go back to bed now.
Yeah.
5 o'clock in the morning here, but I did see we had someone from Darwin, and that's a little bit earlier than where I am down here. So. Well, I hope you got something out of it. It's maybe even you had your own little light bulb moment. Darwin is behind us yet. So yeah, hopefully, you may have heard something, but oh yeah, I've experienced that. So it is quite common. I just wanted to kind of bring it all together into a bundle of of topics that can pretty much cover everything. So I'll make the presentation available online in the course. I'll put it up in the course straight away as the PDF. But like I said, if you wanted to get some more info, go onto my site and yeah, go and grab the ebook and have a read of it.
Thanks again, Julian. And thank you everybody for attending. It always makes it much nicer when there's people here in the room to engage and things like that. So thank you all for being here.